Eleanor Roosevelt, do solemnly swear.
I, Dwight D. Eisenhower, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution.
The Constitution of the United States. So help me God.
States. So help me God. Good evening, everybody. I've got a couple of questions for you before we get started. Is March 4th the actual inauguration day? Question number 2, who is the Sovereign Citizen Movement? Do you have any idea who they are or what the actual inauguration day is? We're going to talk about those and solve this situation and get it straight. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Our Constitution in the News. I'm Mark David Smith. This report is titled March 4th versus September 20th, Setting It Straight. I used several internet articles for my research and base outline for this report, and I'll list them at the end of the report. And you can find the details of these references on MessianicLambNetwork.com. And now for my research on President and Vice President Inauguration Day, March 4th versus January 20th. Lord, we ask that our governmental leaders would be God-fearing and recognize that they are accountable to you for each decision and act. The 20th Amendment to the United States Constitution moved the beginning and ending of the terms of the president and vice president from March 4th to January 20th. The 20th Amendment was adopted on January 23rd, 1933. The part of the 20th Amendment that applies to our report states, and I quote, "The terms of the president and vice president shall end at noon on the 20th day of January." I find it interesting that this statement, the only statement in the entire Constitution to state an exact time and an exact date, is actually in the negative, as it states an end to the term and not the beginning of the term. I guess the beginning of each new term is assumed as apparent. It would seem that the only problem with the statement in the Constitution of these United States is if you believe it or not. So who doesn't believe this statement written in the Constitution of the United States? The Sovereign Citizen Movement, that's who. The Sovereign Citizen Movement believes that Americans are not subject to a variety of federal laws. They believe that a law enacted in 1871 secretly turned the United States into a corporation rather than a nation. They view every president inaugurated since this time as illegitimate. Members of the Sovereign Citizen Movement believe that former President Ulysses S. Grant was the last legitimate president. President Grant, like other presidents in the 19th century, were inaugurated on March 4th, all except for George Washington. The Sovereign Citizen Movement believes that the Republic will be restored and Trump will become the United States 19th president on March 4th this year. So, once again, the only difference is whether or not you believe it or not. Sorry, redundant statement. At New York City's Federal Hall on March 4th, 1789, the Senate convened for the first time. From 1789 until 1933, when the Constitution's 20th Amendment changed the convening time to 12 noon on January 3rd. The date of March 4th would rank among the most important on the congressional calendar. Let's see. Let me take you back here a little bit. The state had convened for the first time, and they changed that from the same time to January 3rd. As the Constitution's framers had no way of knowing when the new Constitution would be approved, they directed the Congress under the aspiring Articles of Confederation to set the convening date in September 1788. Once the necessary 9 states had ratified, the Confederation Congress chose March 4th. It's not actually in there. They chose it as March 4th. I find it's reported in numerous articles that the Congress of the Confederation set March 4th as the date for commencing proceedings of the newly organized government. March 4th, it was the Constitution's first official day in business. The first modern Congress convened in New York City at Federal Hall. It was about 1 month before George Washington was elected as the first president under the new Constitution. But I have a copy of the Congress of the Confederation, and there is no mention of the setting of an inauguration date anywhere throughout the document. Both the Library of Congress and the White House show Washington was sworn in as the first U.S. president on April 30th, 1789. But he was inaugurated for his second term on March 4th, 1793, which the library says was the official date of inauguration at the time. Although Congress scheduled the first inauguration for March 4, 1789, they were unable to count the electoral ballots as early as anticipated. So the first inauguration for George Washington was postponed to allow the president-elect time to make the long trip from his home in Virginia to the nation's capital in New York City. The Library of Congress Index of Inaugurations shows most presidents for more than 100 years were inaugurated on March 4th. March 4th was established by Confederation Congress as Inauguration Day in order to allow enough time for Election Day, after Election Day, for officials to gather election returns and for newly elected candidates to travel to the Capitol, just like we just said with George Washington. It was established before the Constitution was written. The Confederation Congress that operated under the Articles of Confederation chose March 4th, 1789, as the date it would hand off powers to the new government established by the Constitution. So, the March 4th Inauguration Day was never written in any Articles of Confederation or Congress of the Confederation or the final Constitution of the United States. It was established and set in motion as the traditional day of inauguration by the Confederation Congress before the Constitution ever took effect. The problem was that there was too much time between Election Day and Inauguration Day. The long lame duck period might have been a practical necessity at the end of the 18th century when any newly elected official might require several months to put his affairs in order and then undertake an arduous journey from his home to the nation's capital. With modern advances in communication and transportation, the lengthy transition period proved unnecessary and legislatures pressed for change. From the early 19th century, it also meant a lame duck Congress. That's called what the people are. So that would be Congress in between the time that they were elected out of office and to the time that they were inaugurated into office is called a lame duck session. So when you say a lame duck Congress, it would be the Congress that was and is still performing its duties up until the time it has to step away for the new Congress. Same thing with the president and vice president. That's a lame duck session. So once again, from the early 19th century, it also meant a lame duck Congress and presidential administration would fail to adequately respond to a significant national crisis in a timely manner. The fact that the new Congress and presidential administration did not begin operation until April. March 4th was deemed to be the beginning of the newly elected officials' terms of office and thus of the end of the terms of their successors. The Constitution did not specify a date for federal elections, but by the time of the second presidential election in 1792, Congress had passed a law requiring presidential electors to be chosen during November or early December. By 1845, this was narrowing to a single day in early November. The result of these scheduling decisions was that there was a long 4-month lame duck period between the election and inauguration of the new president. Eventually, there would be an opportunity to cut down the length of that lame duck period with the improvement of technology in travel and counting. Along comes the 20th Amendment to the United States Constitution. The amendment reduced the presidential transition and the lame duck period by which members of Congress and the president serve the remainder of their terms after an election. The amendment established congressional terms to begin before presidential terms, and that the incoming Congress, rather than the outgoing one, would hold a contingent election, and in the event that the Electoral College deadlocked regarding either the presidential or vice presidential elections. In 1921, President-elect Warren G. Harding set an inaugurational first by traveling to the Capitol for his inauguration in an automobile. It was just one sign of the changing times. With modern advances in communication and transportation, election officials and newly elected candidates no longer needed 4 months to gather election returns and travel to Washington. To minimize the transition period between Election Day and Inauguration Day and curtail lame duck Congresses, legislators introduced the 20th Amendment to the United States Constitution. On January 20th, 1937, Franklin Delano Roosevelt became the first U.S. president sworn into office in January. It was his second of 4 inaugurations. The first had been held 4 years earlier on March 4th, 1933. Since the 2020 elections, we've all heard countless stories about Trump in and out of office. Impeachment proceedings. I've even heard one the other day that said they were already starting secret proceedings to take Biden out of office and Trump would be sworn in on the actual real inauguration day, March 4th. Well, let me steer you in another direction and stop listening to that kind of thing. As we talked about earlier, there's groups all over that believe that the actual day is March 4th and that our government is not the right government that's in office. If it happens, it's just going to happen outside of everything else going on. Well, I just told the story, the whole story. March 4th was the accepted day of inauguration until 1933. The 20th Amendment to the actual Constitution of the United States says, as I quote, the terms of the president and vice president shall end at noon on the 20th day of January. There are no new amendments concerning this issue. Listen, if someone in some kind of authority that actually has some authority can prove the elections were miscounted and Trump did actually win, I'm sure they will set the record straight. Now, whether they'll put our President Trump, back in office, I haven't found that provision in the Constitution yet. Doesn't mean that it's not there. I just haven't seen it, and nobody that I know in any research that I've done can show me that they can't even put President Trump back in office on March 4th. So maybe other means, but not through the Constitution. By the way, Inauguration Day for the president and vice president is January 20th, following the election of the same. My main outline for this report came from 7 online sources. They are an article from Wikipedia.org titled 20th Amendment to the United States Constitution, an article from the National Constitution Center titled On This Day, Government Begins Under Our Constitution, an article from King 5 News titled Answering Common Questions About Inauguration Day History. Also, an article from the Library of Congress titled Today in History, January 20th, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Inauguration. Also, an article from the United States Senate titled The Significance of March 4th. Another article from the Library of Congress titled Today in History, March 4th, Inauguration Day. And lastly, an article from Financial Review, or AFR.com, titled Trump's D.C. Hotel Hikes Prices for Day QAnon thinks he'll be sworn in. Sorry, it threw me off there. You can find these links to these articles, find all the links on the MessianicLambNetwork.com website at MessianicLambNetwork.com or MessianicLambRadio.com. Thank you for joining, and please use the Messianic Lamb Network website for all your Messianic needs. There are over 1,400 Messianic videos, and that is climbing as of today. We're growing close to 1,500 Messianic videos at the Lamb Network website. Messianic media for the Messianic lifestyle at www.messianiclambnetwork.com. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Our Constitution in the News. I'm Mark David Smith.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hugi, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.
Delano Roosevelt, do solemnly swear.
I, Dwight D. Eisenhower, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States. So help me God.